I'm Yvonne Hamoud, registered social worker and owner of New Moon Counseling, but out of the office, I'm a mom, wife, daughter, sister, and friend. Join me each week as I sit with a special guest to discuss everyday things that impact our mental health. We'll be chatting about everything from mental health and relationships to media and current events, as well as personal experiences and reflections, all in the hopes of normalizing our humanness and helping you see that you're not alone. This is Outside the Therapy Room. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Outside the Therapy Room. Today, we are joined by Arsh. Hi, Arsh. How are you?
Hello. Thanks for having me back.
Yes, you were here for season 1. You did 2 amazing episodes. I mean, at the beginning, we usually do an introduction, but because you've been here before, we won't do a full introduction. But in season 1, you did have 2 episodes that were on neurodiversity and also around identity. And I know at that time you had disclosed a recent diagnosis. And so I just wanted to see if there's any updates on that as like your little introduction for this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel like our topics are making it, identity, neurodiversity. Now we're talking about masking. It all flows very well together. So yes, I think back at that time, I had just been diagnosed with like ADHD. I am now have also been diagnosed with autism. It's kind of been like an ongoing process. Level 1. We're aware now that it's like level 1, level 2, level 3. And so, yeah, I've been diagnosed with autism level 1 and a few other things, but for the sake of this podcast specifically, the autism and the ADHD is kind of what's more relevant. And that's kind of the experience from which I will be speaking. So we're going to be talking about like neurodivergence a bit today and masking and what that looks like, but like, right, recognizing that neurodivergence is vast. And I'm going to be focusing more on my lived experience from like, having like level 1 autism or late diagnosed level 1 autism and ADHD.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I know in our first episode on ADHD, we talked a little bit about, how one can get diagnosed, and we had done all of that. So if that's something that listeners are interested in, make sure to check out Arsh's episode from season 1. But yes, today we are talking about masking, and masking is a thing that we do to keep ourselves safe. So it happens in a lot of different areas. It happens in folks who've experienced trauma. It happens in, teenagehood, just trying to feel a sense of belonging. Sometimes we're masking when we're around people. And all of that is because it's a form of safety and security that we're doing for ourselves. But today, we are going to be talking about masking more from the neurodivergent lens. So I just want to make that very clear to our listeners that hopefully at some time in the future, we will be talking about masking maybe more generally or how it shows up in trauma. But for today, we are going to be talking about masking in neurodivergent population.
Absolutely. Yes. And I'll even add to that and kind of say like, right, like masking or camouflaging or right, like it happens in many different identity groups, right? Like it's very like we call it code switching and in like racial identities. We call it like it happens in LGBTQ communities. It's something that happens like not just necessarily as a neurocognitive thing, like in terms of like ADHD, autism, and neurodivergence in general. It's something that we do just being human, being in different spaces. But, it impacts us slightly differently and has slightly different, I guess, consequences, depending on how often we're using it, how much we're using it, and how many like intersectionalities of our identity are kind of like requiring us to mask, like, right? So all of that kind of piles up. So yeah, masking is a very vast, broad topic, but we're going to be focusing honestly more specifically like ADHD, autism today.
Yeah. Okay, so what is masking? Why do people do it? What happens when we mask or when we take the mask off? Those are all questions we hope to answer for you today. And so let's start with that initial one. We talked a little bit about what masking could be, and you kind of talked about how it can it's something that we can do in very like a whole wide range of instances in, different groups that we're in. all of these different areas where masking can kind of take place. But if you can kind of summarize that for us, what is masking and why do people do it? Or I guess, why do neurodivergent folks mask?
Yeah, absolutely. So masking, I'm not like I can give you like I can look up a, very scientific definition of it. I'm just gonna give you like how I understand it,
Yeah.
right? Masking, or like I said, we could also call it like camouflaging. The idea basically is that you are kind of like suppressing parts of yourself as a way to kind of like fit in, and is specifically for neurodivergent communities. That would be like you're trying, like, neurotypical is the norm. So
Hmm.
you are basically suppressing certain traits, and you're mimicking other traits that don't necessarily come naturally to you to appear more neurotypical.
Hmm.
So, for example, that could be like for a lot of autistic individuals, one of the common ones we talk about is like you just force yourself to have like eye contact, even though it's not necessarily comfortable for you.
Yeah.
Caveat to that, not everybody who has autism necessarily has to have issues with eye contact. I'm just going to say that. But,
Hmm.
coming back, because that's just like the expectation, or you might mimic certain facial expressions because, that's considered to be like the norm, or you might suppress like fidgeting or like stimming
Hmm.
or things like that. Like that's something that would be common in ADHD and autism, for example.
Yeah.
Especially, right, like some stims are considered more socially acceptable than others. And so, right, you might, another way is like, right, like you're trying to necessarily, like, maybe you're not gonna uh maybe you're like doodling, for example. Like doodling
Hmm.
is one, like, right, people with ADHD, autism, like it's like you don't want to maybe like make your stimming too obvious, so you just kind of like doodle and whatever, and we still kind of get flack for that, but it's still more
Yeah.
acceptable than perhaps some other stims. So basically the idea is you're masking traits of yourself to appear more neurotypical. And also the other part of it is also like you're mimicking traits that don't necessarily come to you innately.
Hmm.
You're mimicking them, and you're kind of performing them. A big
Yeah.
thing about masking, a big word that you can kind of put with it is like it's a performance. And
Hmm.
a performance over time becomes very exhausting. And the thing about masking is it can happen, we could do it consciously, like we're aware that we're, might be thinking like, I've been making eye contact for like 3 seconds. I should probably look away. And then, like, right. So,
Yeah.
for one, that takes a lot of like conscious effort, which makes it hard to fully connect with someone.
Right.
But it can also happen unconsciously because masking tends to start from a very young age. And so it's a lot of it kind of can happen like unconsciously. You're not even aware that you're kind of doing it. And that's the part that can be really tricky for people, because it's like, where's the mask and where's me? And how do I differentiate between that? And so that's
Hmm.
getting it confusing.
Yeah, I like the word camouflaging because I did imagine it like you don't want to be, and I mean, we'll probably get more into why we mask, but like
Mhm.
camouflaging just reminds me of like you don't want to be seen as something different than the group of
Mhm.
people that you're with. And so making eye contact, like
Yeah.
restraining your fidgeting, like any
Yeah.
kind of like quote unquote odd behavior that
Yeah.
would
It
be
might be
like
just,
not
yeah.
typical. Yeah,
Hmm.
like you're trying to camouflage and to, yeah,
Hmm.
not kind of bring focus on you. And
Hmm.
that when we look at it that way, like that can be really sad, but we can also notice the exhaustion that comes with that too. But
Yeah.
like on another end, it does keep us safe,
Absolutely, right.
right?
Like, and that's something to understand about masking is like, right, like there are people who are not able to mask, right? And
Yeah.
like they don't have the ability to blend in. Right. And so like at the forefront, like masking is a self-protective strategy.
Hmm.
And there are like privileges that kind of come with it. It's just that it also has its own struggles, especially when if it keeps going on for too long and we don't find those communities where we don't have to mask as much.
Yeah. You did touch on it starting at a young age, and I can imagine masking for kiddos being kind of like a social strategy, like social
Mhm.
survival strategy, right? Where
Absolutely.
we're like, we need to fit in. we need to be safe. We need to do all of these things, especially
Hmm.
in school where it's not always an environment that's built for neurodivergent folks, right?
Hmm.
Like, so you mentioned it starting from a young age. So what does that look like for kiddos then? How do they learn that?
So, well, right, like kids are kind of like, right, like sponges, like, you're kind of like absorbing everything around you, right? And here's the thing, like this is where why is like embracing neurodiversity amazing? Because when we allow all different kinds of being and that's the norm, right? Then kiddos don't feel like they have to conform to a certain specific way of being.
Yeah.
But up until very, like, I know things are starting to shift a bit, but right, in general, like the neurotypical way of being is considered to be like the social standard, right?
Hmm.
And so for some kiddos, that just comes naturally, and that's great, right? We don't want to get rid of that. That's well one way to be, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
But right, for kiddos who maybe don't quite fit that and that innately just doesn't work with them, right? And if we're only kind of making one standard to be like, this is what everybody's supposed to be, then right, like kids kind of start to pick up on that, like, oh, like I'm looking at the adults around me, I'm looking at like people like kiddos my age around me, and I'm like, oh, this is, you know I'm gonna like, I'm noticing like the facial expressions, and I'm picking up on like, all these like little things. And masking especially is more of a thing, especially for groups that are like where you're like embracing harmony, and like harmonizing is kind of like I'm like when that's considered like for example, like for AFAB individuals, like those who were born female, like we're more likely to socialize. We're kind of socialized to get along with one another and that kind of thing. And so masking is
Hmm.
going to be more likely in that kind of a group
Hmm.
than necessarily a group, whereas like for boys, it's not necessarily as considered as much of like you're not socialized as strongly to be like
Right.
get along with each other and
Like
like
the societal norms and expectations for, male, female are
yeah.
very different. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So,
Yeah.
like, somehow I hope you guys got what I was trying to say with that. So, say, right? So, masking is going to be more common in groups where we like socialize them to be like,
Mm.
more like, you know, be harmonious and, get along with one another and all that kind of stuff. So, usually
Yeah.
in those kinds of groups. So, that's something to kind of keep in mind. So, typically, like, especially in those little communities, you'll find that kids are going to pick up on masking a little bit more.
Mm.
Maybe there's a little one who doesn't like doesn't really care to play with other kids,
Mhm.
but that is kind of considered like rude, or like you're not sharing, and that's considered like right. So to fit in and to not stand out and to maybe not get in trouble, you're more likely going to be like, okay, even though this is not something that comes
Mhm.
naturally to me and I don't necessarily enjoy doing this, I'm going to become a part of it anyway, and I'm going to do it anyway. Right. So that's just like
Yeah.
a very simple example. But like that, the difference really is like, there are things that come innately to people and other things that just do not come innately to
Mhm.
people, and that's the
Mhm.
biggest difference. What's hard for people when things come to you innately, it's really hard to imagine the experience of somebody where that doesn't come to them innately, and vice
Yeah.
versa, right? But the thing is, those that for maybe who for whom it doesn't come innately, they're expected to kind of like conform and perform
Mhm.
as like, in the more neurotypical sense, and that's kind of where the struggle kind of lies. But yeah, so usually like these things, what we normalize, what the rules are, and those kinds of things vary from a very young age, like kindergarten, daycare.
Yeah.
A lot of people who get diagnosed late talk a lot about like, their first like full um understanding of like, well, they didn't know it at the time, but they realized they really started masking when they were like first in daycare or in like big social
Mhm.
environments where their differences weren't necessarily seen as like strengths or just a thing, but were maybe kind of seen more as negative. And so to
Mhm.
not get that negative attention, you're going to start to mask.
Yeah, it's like the short-term discomfort for long-term comfort, right? Like I
Exactly.
imagine in those environments, like you know, push your discomfort down to mask because the all like to not do
Yeah.
that could end up with, you know, maybe you get in trouble or maybe you have a parent being like, go be social when
Yeah,
really
yeah,
you don't want to be. So yeah,
yeah.
it can be hard. But as you were talking about schools, I was like, you know, things are changing and, you know, I'm very grateful now as a mom to kind of see those changes happening in my kiddos' classrooms. But when I was in elementary school, if you were wiggly, if you were kind of like, you know, rocking on
Mm.
your chair, if you anything like that, you would get in trouble and you would be isolated. You would go outside, you'd go to the principal's office, or you would sit in the corner facing a wall. And now, like my kiddos talk about some friends having like wiggly cushions that they can kind of wiggle in their chair. And they have this really cool thing that I saw and I'm gonna butcher the name, but it's kind of like a chair. It's like a chair, but then it has like a so you sit and it's like this big pole, and then it has like this like bubbly thing at the bottom, so you can like spin and sit in it, and it looks so fun. I'm like, I want to try it. But like they have these resources and these supports to help kiddos, you know, get their wiggles in like a way that's still going to be okay for the classroom. And so that's so exciting to kind of see those changes happening and having those supports be brought in instead of having that child leave the classroom like it was for me and I'm sure for a lot of other people that were growing up.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's what it is, right? Like it's like I think like uh it's human to kind of like we want to like make things efficient and so it's like
Mm.
okay, like if everything can just kind of be the same, it's like easier, it doesn't disturb the larger group, right?
Yeah.
But what you said there makes sense. It's like there are ways that we can make accommodations for people who needs things done a little bit differently without disturbing the rest of the group, right? And so like that's really what makes the difference. It's like, okay, like this kid needs to move. Like
Mhm.
I'm sitting in a rocking chair. Like this is where I do all my work from.
Yeah.
But it's like, not a big deal. Like it's you're a little wiggly and you're not making a lot of noise. It's not necessarily disturbing anybody else. And you're getting to be part of the group and do what you need to do. So it's like we can celebrate that
Yeah.
instead of, that's kind of fun.
Mhm. Yeah. And so masking, it sounds like it's just environmental. We learn based on our environment, but I'm assuming the safety portion of it too, maybe getting in trouble for doing certain things. So we were talking about the classroom, but I'm sure it happens at home as well. Like, you know, why are you jumping on the couch? Sit still, stop moving, like all of these different things. And we're talking about just like physical movement. It could be anything like noise, it could be fidgets, it could be whatever the kiddo needs to kind of help them regulate or whatever it is that they are doing in terms of behavior, but that constantly being corrected by a parent or a guardian or an adult, maybe without the intention of causing harm. It kind of leads into that masking, that need to kind of be safe and not be called out.
Exactly, of course, and it's important to kind of highlight what you said there, right? Like a lot of times it's not necessarily like cruelty or purposeful. Like I'm not
Mhm.
saying that that doesn't exist; it can happen, but like
Yeah.
typically that's not the case. If anything, actually, parents are kind of coming from a place of concern. They don't want their kiddo, like they want to teach their kiddo how to behave, how to be, so they're not called out there, right? So it's like, so if
Hmm.
I can
Hmm.
show you how to be, right? And like you'd be surprised because it's a lot of parents themselves who are undiagnosed and maybe don't realize, right? And like that's how they
Yeah.
had to learn to be like, so they're going to pass that on to their kiddos, right? To be
Hmm.
like, no, like that's not acceptable, that kind of thing. So it's not that, it's not about cruelty, but this is where we talk about like if we allow differences to just exist as a
Yeah.
society, right? Then like that pressure isn't put on parents to kind of have to correct their kiddos when they're and jumping on the couch. Sure, I don't want you to ruin my couch. Like let's not jump on the couch. But what I
Hmm.
can do is maybe get you like a little stim pad or a little like jumping pad or like a trampoline or like, right?
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, right? Like some of these things sometimes cost money, right? So it's like what's a maybe alternative way? Okay, like we're gonna put some pillows or mats or things like that down on the floor, and
Hmm.
like, you can jump there. You can't jump on the couch, but you can jump over there. So like I don't have to stop you from doing the thing. We just kind of have to find like a alternative.
Yeah.
That's what an accommodation is. It's just like
Hmm.
we let's find a compromise where this works for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And the kiddo's still able to do the behavior that they need to do, which is a big piece as well.
Exactly.
Um, we talked a lot, we're talking a lot about kiddos, but as kids go through puberty, as we get into these more maybe slightly complicated social experiences, we're figuring out our identity, which again, folks, if you're interested in hearing our episode on identity with Arsh, check in on season 1. But there's so much happening for teens at that age, right? Like attraction, like trying to connect with peers, figuring out who they are, what their interests are. How does masking change, or does it change in that kind of age group? So moving into the
Yeah,
teenhood.
absolutely. I like from my own personal experience, things that I've read, it gets more complex, right? Like our interactions with one another get more complex as we get older, and masking
Yeah.
actually tends to become harder. So like a lot, right?
Mm.
Like there's a lot more leniency with kids to a degree, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's okay if you're a little bit off or whatever. Like it's just not as noticeable because, kids are kids and kids are silly and they're supposed to be silly.
Yeah.
But especially as we get older, the expectation changes, right?
Mm.
And so masking tends to become more and more difficult and more complicated and nuanced. And usually the idea is like, but it's like a lot of the masking tends to kind of become more unconscious as at that point, right? Because
Mm.
it's like you've been doing it for so long,
Yeah.
and like you don't even realize, like for me, for example, like I didn't get diagnosed till I was 30. um and like I've been obsessed with like psychology and neuroscience and human behavior and all of that stuff. And like I just thought like, it's just an interest of mine, right? But the way I was interested in it was, nobody really noticed at the time. But now that we look back, I'm like, okay, yeah, like the way I was interested in it was different because it was very much like a lifeline for me because it helped me
Mhm.
understand people around me in ways that I couldn't understand otherwise. Like it wasn't
Right.
innately, I didn't just get it. But like when I understood things through like human behavior and theory and how the brain works and all of that, I was like, oh, like I was able to understand, okay, like, cognitively, like this is kind of what's happening for this person. And then it would like make a bit more sense for me. So like I really relied on that stuff to help me. And it actually helped me mask better
Mhm.
because I understood how people worked better, and not in like a I'm trying to like
Yeah.
figure out how people work, but just like I wanted to connect with people, and I struggled with that without that understanding, and that
Mhm.
understanding helped me. And so it's like even that, like the way I was like using that stuff, like I wasn't consciously aware that that's what I was doing. It was
Yeah.
unconscious, right? And so like definitely like, I find that in right, like differences can kind of start to get a lot more obvious and ostracized as you move into teenagehood, right? And so it
Mhm.
tends to be a really difficult time for a lot of kids who are different in whatever way, not just neurodivergence, right? Um, and so that's something to kind of keep in mind. And like some kiddos are kind of able to like figure it out, like, they're able to really like go into that mask, and others aren't, and they can kind of feel like ostracized. But like the hope is that like, right, in either way, that's not helping because the mask is still keeping you disconnected from yourself,
Mhm.
and obviously feeling ostracized, and like the social trauma that kind of comes with that is
Yeah.
right was really really like detrimental. And so again, right, bringing back to like if we normalize differences and things like that societally, like kids won't be feeling those pressures the same way. But
Mhm.
complicated journey and
Yeah.
while to get there.
Yeah, it definitely is. And like as you're talking, I'm just sitting here being like, ugh, society plays such a big role in everything. And like this like norm, quote unquote norm that we all strive for. But like why? Who? Like I'm just like sitting here having like this existential question of like, why is this happening? But to that, there's so much masking that's happening out of a sense of belonging, which again, if we look at teens, if we look at our own kind of experience as teenagers, we have this intense need to belong in this social group that we have deemed kind of valuable, right? Like our relation, and we talk about this a little bit in our episode on identity, but we kind of go from forming our identity from a familial place where we kind of grew up with the people around us that we grew up with, and now we're getting outside of that and figuring out who we are outside of this family and this, kind of familial culture that we have. And through that, sometimes it happens through like experiments. We're going to like connect with one group and kind of see what we like. Okay, no, it didn't quite fit here. Like maybe like this group is more my people. All of this is happening though while we're masking, while like, we're experiencing this disconnect, as you pointed out, like disconnect from ourselves. And if we, tie in the complexities of a romantic relationship into everything, it can be really tough for the person who's doing all of this masking, the emotional exhaustion, the physical toll that that can take, and also the maybe like unawareness of all of this happening because it's happening in such, like you said, in a subconscious way. But I have a point and I'm forgetting it now.
Welcome to my life.
Like, what was my point? But I feel like with that disconnection towards self, then it can become really difficult to really understand what we want out of romantic relationships or, friendships, because we go to like, well, this is a rule book of what I should want because we're wanting to mask and fit in and do all of that. And it can, I guess my point was like, that can be a really, really difficult place for a teenager alone, then add in everything else that's kind of happening on top of that, especially for a neurodivergent folk. Like teen, like that can be just like so overwhelming and isolating too, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have the community to kind of talk about that with.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
100%. I know we're going to talk about resources later, but Lindsay Macrith is like she's a therapist who herself is neurodivergent and works a lot with neurodivergent folks. So
Mhm.
we'll post her like info on it
Yeah, in
after.
the show notes.
I learned a lot about the stuff from her. And she really speaks well to all of that. Like, she actually has this, she created this like flow chart of like, especially for like individuals. So it's like basically like individuals, she coined this term called neural complexity, which
Mhm.
basically what it is like when you have like multiple labels of neurodivergence, right? So like you have ADHD, autism, giftedness, OCD,
Mm.
etc. Like you may have any combination of these things, but like usually like people who are neurodivergent, you aren't usually just one. You usually have like a mix of, because even like trauma, anxiety, depression, like all of that kind of comes
Yeah.
into this, right? So you usually have comorbidities. I don't know if I said that word right, but Uh, anyway, so the point is, she talks about like neurocomplexity, and she talks about how like she created these like streams of like, individuals who are like, move into the successful stream, she puts in quotation marks, which is like, you did well in school and you did well in like university, you got
Mm.
yourself like a stable career, and then like you crash and burn out. And like it's like basically like a flow chart of like when burnout kind of hits. And then there's the like,
Yeah.
other stream where it's like, maybe you didn't really, you never really fit in. Maybe we kind of like became more of like an outcast, et cetera, et cetera. I'll let you guys like go through the chart on your own. It's really cool. I'm like very much simplifying it.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, we will. But it's like really, really cool. I found it very eye opening for me, just to kind of like look at it because I was like, damn, like this is exactly it. And like it kind of
Yeah.
goes into like in all the different stages, like things you might struggle with, right? So like a lot of
Mm.
neurodivergent folks do struggle with like depression, anxiety, like suicidal ideation, and things like that because of the struggles of not fitting in and
Mhm.
feeling, and like it's not just about not fitting in, it's about being made to feel like inherently wrong about yourself, right? That there's
Yeah.
something wrong with you when that's not necessarily the case. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just different and you do things differently. And there's strengths and limitations to that, just
Hmm.
like with any human trait, right? But when we like focus on this small subset of traits being okay and everything outside of that being wrong, it inherently is going to create that shame. And so not only are we like isolated, now we're also experiencing shame, and that's going to obviously be a melting pot for other, struggles with other mental illnesses like depression, anxiety,
Mm.
that kind of stuff. I don't know where my tangent to how it came here, but somehow that made me think of this. So here we are.
That's okay. I think it's going to be a podcast on tangents because now I have one about like how does like other like like I don't know. I while you were talking, everything was like to the other. Like you're kind of like put in this place of other
Mhm.
just because you are not neurotypical or you don't think or do things similarly to the quote unquote norm. But then add on top of that somebody who is othered in different places, like somebody who is like a different culture or a different race. Add to that, different sexual identity or different, all of these things. Add that to this pot. Like, whoa, there's like so much otherness and, isolation, not belonging to this like norm. I can't think of another word. This like societal norm or expectation of like white heterosexual, neurotypical, like all of these things. And so I can't even imagine what that experience is like for folks that, kind of meet all of these little, check marks in their lives. But yeah.
Yeah,
Anyways,
like
that's my tangent.
yeah, no, like the intersection of all your different identities, right? Like we're not just
Yes. Yeah.
one thing, right? Like we are a mosaic of things.
Hmm.
And like those who choose to check out Lindsay Mack's stuff, like she even talks about like the idea, like the concept of neurotypical in and of itself is harmful because
Yeah.
really like it's not that neurotypical traits don't exist. They do. Like they're innately just part human traits, and like some people have them and it comes to them innately, others don't. But when we kind of like take a certain subgroup and make it like this is considered the norm, it
Mm.
restricts anyone, right? So it's like, maybe you do want to explore things outside of that, but
Yeah.
you're now afraid to because this is considered normal. So just like the idea of like what is normal and what is
Hmm.
neurotypical, and like even the idea of like what even like there is more neurodivergence than there is neurotypical, because like the idea neurotypical simply means these are the traits we've deemed to be typical.
Yeah.
Everything outside of it is divergent. Okay, so like
Yeah.
everything outside of it is obviously greater than this
This
circle
little
here.
box. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this little box here, right? So it's like, like so the idea of like neurodiversity is right, that like we all have different brains. Like
Yeah.
simplify it, it's like every brain is different. Some brains are more alike in their differences,
Hmm.
right? And so on. But like we all have a different brain that's shaped by like brains are so cool and so
Yeah.
complex.
Yeah.
Like every single moment of your life impacts the way that your brain is structured and formed and the connections between them. And it continues to evolve until we die. Like
Yeah.
it's right. So it's
That
like,
is
it's
pretty cool.
very, yeah, it's really cool if you think about it. So it's like when we kind of like start looking at like, this is what's normal and this is what's not. Like, I promise you, when you actually start looking at a brain, I dare you to try to tell me what's normal and what isn't. Like, it's
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah. It's a lot more complicated for sure. I think there's also, and, this is our last little tangent that we'll move on. But I think previously, and we talked about this on our neurodivergent episode, but we talked a little bit about like these categories that used to exist, like you're autistic or you have Asperger's. Like there's like those two different things. And now, kind of now it's kind of become a spectrum because you don't just fit in one box. And so change is happening somehow, even though it might be very slow, change is happening. So now it is autism spectrum disorder, and you can fall in, wherever within that spectrum. And so it is kind of cool to see those like little small changes happening. But I thought that was maybe an example of like this little box, and now we're widening up things, right?
Exactly. No, exactly. And like, you know, it makes sense for there to be, right? Like, because like we're also, as we're starting to create like, things, we're noticing that things are moving more towards, instead of this or that, we're moving towards spectrums. And
Mm-hmm.
right, like it makes sense. This or that feels clean and clear. And it's like it's either this or it's either that. And we like the simplicity and the clarity of that. Like,
Yeah.
especially as someone who's autistic, that sounds great. Like it's this
Mm-hmm.
or that. But life is not this or that. Like
Right.
most things that are human are not this or that, right? And we're kind of starting to realize that as a species, that like,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like things that are this or that are very rarely the whole truth, right? Like
Yeah.
things are gradients, right? And that's why the uncertainty feels uncomfortable and we don't like it and we want to reject it. And that's also very human. But we want to be aware of that, right? Like are we actually rejecting the thing because we think it's not true? Or are we rejecting the thing because it just makes us uncomfortable because we're not used to the uncertainty, right? Like that's kind of something to just like think about. A lot of the things that we're kind of talking about when we talk about gender, we're talking about neurodiversity, we're talking about all these things, and we're kind of recognizing like, right, like things aren't this or that. Like life really works on a gradient.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunately a little bit more complicated than the simplicity that we want to put it in. But moving into something that you discussed kind of around this like diagram that Lindsay put together, you talked about kind of it going like you're doing good at school, you're getting good grades, you're at school, and then boom, burnout. We've talked a little bit about burnout already. And when we mask for a long time, we can experience not only emotional burnout, but physical as well. And so tell us a little bit about like, how does masking impact our mental health and burnout?
That one is a big topic, um, especially in the autistic community. There's something that the autistic community actually calls autistic burnout that is very different than what we kind of like. Because when we think of burnout, we kind of associate it with like work related burnout.
Mm.
Whereas like when we talk about autistic burnout, it's like a full existential, like human related burnout, because the idea is like, especially if you've masked from a very young age, um a lot of people who are right like autistic and they've masked for a very young age and they were diagnosed like later in life talk about this sense of like not ever really knowing who they were. It's like
Mm.
you know like that there's like this fundamental part of you there, but it's like you can't access it, and you're so, and like your brain basically develops with this like no matter whatever situation you go into, you camouflage, you become like a chameleon, you take that on. And again, that's a great survival strategy, but survival strategies are meant to be short term, right? We're not meant to be in survival all the time. And so when we're in that survival all the time, that puts a lot of strain, like being in that fight or flight, freeze, fawn response
Mhm.
all the time is taxing on the body, and it's a physiological thing, right? So a lot of people who have masked for a very long time do experience like physical things like, later on in life will like develop like autoimmune disorders or chronic pain disorders or chronic fatigue disorders, and it's all kind of like related to the burnout in the sense of like where all of this over functioning that they were able to kind of push themselves to do suddenly just collapses.
Mm.
And like for some people that can happen slowly over time. For other people it can be like a, kind of big dramatic thing where you suddenly just stop.
Mm.
And like that, and like without getting like into all the nitty-gritty details of it, like that's kind of what I'll say, like with burnout is just like it's the strain over time. Masking is straining, and over time it wears you down. And like I kind of look at it like they talk about this in burnout in general. It's like you're borrowing from tomorrow to kind of like make it through today.
Yeah.
Eventually you're going to run out of your tomorrows, and you're going to need to
Mm.
build up that reserve again. And you're going to have to kind of like figure out who you are, what your needs are, what you need to live more sustainably and authentically. And unless you kind of start to bring those changes on, burnout will continue, right? And burnout is
Yeah.
reversible, but only if we start to give our bodies what they need, right?
Mhm.
So if we need to start accommodating ourselves, we need to start, right? It's like it's basically the body's like, you guys heard the body says no, right? When the body says no, it's like the body's like, no, I have no more. Like your brain wants to keep going, your mind wants to
Yeah.
be like, no, but your body's like, I have nothing more to give anymore. Like something needs to change. And it's devastating for a lot of people because it's a
Yeah.
huge identity crisis almost, right? Amongst other things, amongst physical
Mhm.
health, emotional health, mental health. There's all this identity stuff going on. It's a big thing. But like I said, for some people that can happen like kind of gradually in small spurts. And for some people, it's like a big dramatic moment where it's just like, well,
Yeah, I can't imagine how difficult that would be because if you, again, you mentioned like being aware and then being unaware of your body masking. If you're aware, I can't imagine the amount of anxiety that one would feel having to constantly keep themselves in check to make sure that they're masking. Am I keeping eye contact? Am I doing this right? Oh shit, I'm fidgeting. I'm going to like sit on my hands. Like all of these things that you're constantly monitoring in yourself. I just even thinking about it just sounds so exhausting. And like you mentioned too, right? Anxiety, depression, identity confusion, like all of those things can kind of come into play. And that's really hard. And so, like you said, it can happen over time, kind of gradually. You can notice that burnout, or like it happens more dramatically on like one moment. What recommendations would you give to folks who are experiencing burnout from neurodivergent masking?
um, honestly, like this is gonna sound silly, but like listen to your body. You don't want to. And that's okay. Like
Mhm.
that's gonna be part of it. Like you're when you're masking, like your mind and your body are constantly fighting each other. Like and that's why there's like a disconnect between them. And when the body's finally like, nope, right? Like I'm not gonna let you bully me anymore.
Mhm.
I got nothing more to give, right? It's like, it's basically like we have to learn to listen to our body. And the thing is, like, that's not easy for a lot of people, right? Like, masking isn't just like safety socially, it's also like, I need to work, I need to provide for my family.
Yeah.
Like, I'm exhausted all the time, but like, I don't have the privilege to not work or to not do these things, right? And so it's like I recognize like that's so much easier said than done. And that's why
Mhm.
it's like little bits at a time matters, right? Like letting yourself have like, an extra 5 minutes for yourself will go every day, will go a long way so that that big burnout isn't happening in the end where like we aren't just like shutting down, giving
Mhm.
ourselves little moments in the day that we can to listen to our body, it right, like just building that little connection, it makes a big
Mhm.
difference. And right, and the thing is like when we are in like active burnout, it's not like a mind over matter thing, like it is, right, like it's like if somebody had cancer, we're not going to expect them to function the same way
Right.
as if they didn't. Like, right? When burnout at that level is a very physiological, physical thing. It's not
Mhm.
just in your head. It's not something that we can just like fight through. Like you need to it's unfortunately your body's demanding rest, and then that's kind of what you need. And I one thing I say, like, I don't know, maybe like maybe it's biased because I am a therapist, but like I find like having a therapist who understands neurodivergence and
Mhm.
neurodiversity and like kind of provides that affirming care makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and like any kind of therapy is great, but I find that like, right, like finding somebody who actually knows about this stuff. So you're not having to educate them, but they can kind of support you. That makes
Mhm.
a huge difference.
Mhm.
Somebody who can kind of support you, that makes a huge difference if you're able to afford that, right? But if not, like, right, just something as simple as like do yourself the favor of just letting yourself have like 5 minutes a day where you let your body tell you what it wants versus your brain kind of always telling your body what it should be doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that like awareness of your body, kind of reconnecting with it, even if it's for 5 minutes.
Yeah,
It
even if it's
honestly
just
sounds
you.
so small. Yeah, it's not like 2 minutes to start, but it sounds like, oh, that's not going to make any difference, but it does. Like it does. And as you kind of continue adding that 2 minute kind of check in with your body every day and bump it up to five, whatever, it does eventually make a big difference. So if somebody wanted to, practice maybe living more authentically and kind of leaning towards dropping this mask that they've worn for such a long time, what would that look like? I know obviously right now you mentioned, checking into your body. Those are small ways for us to connect to our authentic selves, getting support from a therapist, other professionals, that can also be helpful. But what would unmasking look like for somebody?
Yeah, the first thing I'll kind of say to that, right, is like there needs to be like a level of safety, right, for people to feel like they can even and do that, right? So it's like uh, I find if it's not a therapist, if that's not something that's like feasible or affordable for us, right? Like communities, right? Like finding like really we just need a place where we can feel safe.
Mhm.
Like, right? And it's like, even if that's by ourselves, like to start, I do find that a lot of this stuff does happen relationally, right? Like a lot of the wounds and things like that we carry tend to be in a relational sense. So a lot of the healing kind of has to happen in a relational sense. But to
Mhm.
start at least, even if that's just like, I have my like, think about all of your senses. What is pleasing to you? Do you like low light? Do you like bright lights? Do you like neon lights? Do you like, certain smells? Do you like certain textures? Like, is there a way for you to maximize that, like, in your space? Like, okay, like in my
Mhm.
room, I'm gonna like make my room my little cozy paradise, or whatever that might be, right? Like that could be a place of safety. Or I'm going to find a community where I feel like I can be a bit more me. Like you'll feel that. Like you'll feel where you can be like a little bit more yourself. And, it might be a little bit like anxiety provoking, but I'm reassured to be myself, and that's
Mhm.
okay, right? Like I'm not exhausted and drained after, right? I feel good after. Right? Like so finding a community or a group of friends or someone, or like even if it's like a certain class that you go to, or like a little board game event that you go to, or like an online community, like it doesn't matter, but like find
Mhm.
something where that helps you like feel good, like right, like listen to
Yeah.
that. Or right, for some people like being out in nature is very like that evokes that feeling. Like honestly, it comes down to getting to know what does safety feel like for you, right?
Mhm.
We need to focus on that first. So focus on what safety feels like for you. Once you can feel safe, the unmasking will almost like it'll kind of happen a little bit more naturally. There are things
Yeah.
that you'll probably have to do, more on purpose. Um, but you'll start to notice like some of the like masks don't just like drop, right? Like there's layers to our mask
Mm.
and there's like layers to it. And so you might notice like some of those layers drop almost automatically once you start to feel safe, right? And then you get to choose like, and the idea of like unmasking isn't that you just um like lose like the idea it's because it's like sometimes we do need to put the mask back on in certain like when I'm at
Hmm.
work, there's a certain way I need to be, or I'm
Hmm.
around this group, or maybe I'm around my family, or maybe around people that I don't feel as comfortable or as safe with. I need to have my mask back on. That there's nothing wrong with that. But you want to find a space where you can put the mask down at least a little bit so
Yeah.
that you can start connecting with who you really are and your system can actually like have a place where it can like breathe and not be in this like fight or flight mode all the time.
Hmm.
And the other thing I will say is unmasking can be a very scary process for a lot of people, especially if you're masked from a very young age. There's no like like sometimes there's not like a formed self underneath because you never actually got to create one. You just masked and like you just went along with whatever environment the environment needed from you. So you're building a sense of self now as you're learning to unmask. And that can be very scary. Right. And so that's why having that safety, right? Like I never like unmasking is not necessarily a journey we start until we find that safety for ourselves. Right.
Mm.
Whether that's in our own company, in nature's company, in the company of good friends or people who accept us, whatever that might look like or a therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's about giving yourself a break from having those masks. And as you were talking, do you find that there's confusion between masking and boundary setting? Because I feel like, you know, and maybe I'm wrong, but if folks are like, oh, I want to, unmask and I want to be more my authentic self, they may maybe think or expect that that means not having boundaries or and going too far to the other end of like, now I have to be this version of myself in every kind of, group that I'm a part of. And that's not necessarily the case. We're going to continue to have boundaries. Like you pointed out, we're going to show up as the selves that need to show up at work or in certain environments that we're a part of. And so I think like it's important to also recognize that unmasking doesn't mean throwing all your boundaries out the window. It means about which environments do I feel safe enough to maybe, check back into my boundaries, and maybe what environments is it safe for me to, maybe set that boundary down or to reinstate my boundary stronger or whatever it could be.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right? And it's like absolutely, like it's kind of like recognizing, a boundary almost is also like, when you start to unmask, like there might be like you might start to notice like this is a space in my life where like I don't want to put the energy into that anymore. Like it's right. And it's like you might actually start to develop boundaries for the first time.
Yeah.
Being like, right? Like being like, like this is hurting me. Or like, when I'm here, when I'm in this group, or when I'm in this certain situation, like it's very hard on me. Right. And so like I'm actually gonna set a boundary and I'm not gonna put myself in that situation anymore.
Mm.
Right. But yeah, you're right. There's no like unmasking. It's like it's about having that freedom again. It's like you have the freedom to be the version or the part of yourself that you want to show up as, right?
Mm.
And like most things, like we're not just one thing. We're a whole bunch of things. We have conflicting feelings, thoughts, emotions, and with some people we might more a certain part of us might come out more, with other people a certain part of us might come out more, and that's all okay. It's just like not having to have that tension of just like, you know, suppressing and like performing all the time, right?
Hmm.
It's just like it
Yeah.
happens more naturally.
Hmm. What advice do you have for people who are supporting neurodivergent loved ones?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, honestly, like advice for any loved one, really, right? Like, we let's understand one another. Let's make an effort to understand one another.
Mhm.
Let's make an effort to connect with one another in ways that we both appreciate, right? I think sometimes what can happen is like it depends on the family dynamic, right? Like it's like if most family members are like a certain way and like maybe one or two family members are a little bit different, doesn't matter who's neurodivergent and who's neurotypical in that. It just
Mm.
right when we notice that like there's a minority in the house that's maybe a little different, the expectation becomes to like have them acclimate to the rest of the group. But how can we make it more safe for everybody to be who they actually are? So
Mhm.
it doesn't mean that we only do things one way or like only do stuff to accommodate, the ones that are different. But, we find balance in that. It's like, okay, let's connect in, in some ways that, my younger one likes to do this. So, once a week or once a month, we're going to make an effort to go do that. And my other one's like something that's the total opposite of that. Well, once a month, we're going to do that. And so let's say one likes like we want to go do something really fun and exciting and loud, but
Mm.
one of our kids just doesn't like that. Instead of forcing them to enjoy it, what can we do to kind of help them make it more tolerable for them? Okay, maybe we could get some headphones, maybe we could like do something that doesn't make the experience completely awful for them, but
Yeah.
they can still enjoy it with the family, right? So it's like a big thing for me is really like let's make an effort to like understand one another. Let's make an effort to let's not see difference as defiance or as just like laziness or whatever. Let's
Mhm.
actually let's be curious about why might my kiddo be acting this way, or why might they be like doing that, and let's actually try to understand, because kids don't know why. They need the adults in their lives to
Yeah.
help them understand why they're feeling the way that they're feeling. And if we label it as defiance and laziness, that's what they're going to think that it is, when most often it's usually not the case.
Mhm.
They just need a little bit more, something a little different. They're just looking for more nuanced understanding.
Yeah, and I will add to that too, that curiosity piece is so important. But I think if we're looking at, actually, I guess, loved ones of any age, we also need to look at our own discomfort of our own kind of, stigmatized beliefs or or whatever it could be. Because I know there's been family friends who, notice a difference in their kiddo, but is uncomfortable with that difference. And, for a variety of reasons, maybe out of their own anxiety for their kiddo being different and not wanting their kiddo to stand out, whatever it could be, but kind of checking ourselves first and to see, what are my beliefs about a neurodivergent community? What are my beliefs? What are my worries? What are my anxieties? And I think that that can also help extend how we approach, loved ones who maybe are neurodivergent, either diagnosed or undiagnosed. But it'll kind of definitely change the way that we approach folks. It changes the way that we expect or how we communicate, all of those things. So really checking in with yourself first, and any discomfort that you have, trying to find a safe place for you to maybe communicate that discomfort and to educate ourselves on what this is. Because I think we talked about it in our previous episode as well. Media has, really kind of put um, ADHD, or folks who have ADHD, folks who have autism, in these very um, not well represented kind of behaviors and people. There's so many movies out there that we can say like, oh, it's about an autistic character, and that's not everybody's experience, and that's not what autism looks like for everybody. And so definitely kind of checking in with yourself is going to be the most helpful way to start creating that safe space and that curiosity with a loved one, regardless of their age.
Absolutely. And the final thing I'll kind of add to that is like, right, when we're looking at educating ourselves, right? Like that's important. Like when you said that, like right, let's go out there and let's that's what curiosity does, right? If we're curious, let's go learn more about this. But
Yeah.
what I will say is like try learning from neurodivergent folks themselves, right?
Yes.
Like let's give the voice to the people who are actually experiencing it, right?
Hmm.
Um, the more we actually learn from them, the more we actually understand from them, the more like because a lot of ADHD, autism, a lot of neurodiverse stuff, it's looked at like from the outside, right?
Yeah.
Like it's an outside person observing and oh, these behaviors is affecting the people around them. That's not going to be a very good indicator of what actually happened to for the person. It's from like an observer point of view. And so it's a lot about like what you see and how that affects other people around them. And that's not going to give you that doesn't tell you anything about the actual person and what they're experiencing and what's happening inside them, right? And so learning from actual neurodivergent folks, right? There's a lot of neurodivergent folks out there who've spent their life like researching this stuff,
Hmm.
right? And so like let's give voice to those people and let's actually learn from them, because they're going to be the best like ones to speak to their experiences, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing I'll usually say, and that's another reason why I really enjoyed some of Lindsay's stuff, is because right, I know that she is neurodivergent herself, and I think it like and everybody can only really speak from their own lens,
Hmm.
right? Like I'm somebody who has ADHD and autism level 1, and like I can speak from a certain place, but right, with somebody who has like level 3 autism and has totally different like needs than I do,
Hmm.
right? Like I can't speak to their autistic experience and we need to
Right.
right like hear that like them as well. And there's
Hmm.
lots of individuals out there who are speaking from that, becoming a voice for that group as well. So it's important for us to listen to all the different voices and listen directly from the source.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really important. Is there anything else that you think would be important to share as we wrap up this episode?
I don't think so. Um,
Like the topics that we discussed today could be their own podcast episode, like
I know.
masking in relationships. That could be its
It's
own episode.
yeah, it can be like a whole podcast
Yeah.
on its own.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
But yeah, no, no, I don't think so. I'm a rambler. I have about 80,000 thoughts happening at the same time in my brain. So I hope I made sense.
Oh, you did. Yeah.
Um, but if I don't know if there are options for people to ask questions or things like that, but I'm always happy to maybe do a little like I can always like if there's any questions or whatever, I can always like write a blog or something because then I can at least
Hmm.
I can streamline my thoughts better when I write.
Yeah. We do have it in the show notes, a place where you can email us at hello@newmooncounseling.com. So if you do have any more questions for Arsh, like add them in there and we'll try to kind of curate something for Arsh to answer some of those questions. So please do that. And we'll also add the resources that you mentioned. And if there are folks that you recommend following on social media, we'll add their handles on there as well.
Yeah, awesome, perfect. Yeah, I do have the book recommendation, which is
Yeah.
"Unmasking Autism" by Devin Price. So we'll put that in there as well, and then yeah, I'll share some of the resources from Lindsay Mackworth's like stuff that she's done, and we'll
Mhm.
put her page on there as well. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's always so fun to kind of connect and sit down and talk about all of this stuff with you. So I appreciate you being here.
no worries. Thank you so much for having me. It's I definitely love talking about this stuff,
Yeah.
and so yeah, no, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And thanks everyone for listening. You can follow us next week. We will be talking to Lizette, who will be back, talk about the importance of peer support in postpartum care. So make sure to tune into that one, and we will see you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening to Outside the Therapy Room. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you reside in Ontario and are interested in working with one of our therapists, please visit our website in the show notes. If you reside outside of Ontario, a quick Google search or search through Psychology Today will help you find a therapist near you.